I remember the day Linda stood there in her wedding dress, a stark contrast to the turmoil I was facing. Despite being my real sister, she often spoke without considering my feelings, saying things like, "Since you'll probably never get married, Amy, why don't you just enjoy looking at me in my wedding dress?" The words stung, but I tried to keep my distance, to maintain peace in my life. However, peace was the last thing I found. One day, out of the blue, my husband Mike dropped the bombshell that he wanted a divorce. We had been married for nearly 30 years, and the news shattered my world. I thought our marriage was strong, stable. The announcement was like a bolt out of the blue, leaving me questioning everything I thought was true about our life together. What had I done wrong? Had I unknowingly caused him trouble? A year after our separation, as I was still trying to piece together my shattered life, an invitation arrived. Mike was getting remarried. The thought of it was like a knife twisting in my heart. How could he move on so quickly? And to invite me to witness his new happiness, it felt like a mockery of the life we had shared. Amidst all this, my children, Emma and Jack, were my pillars of strength. Emma, a brilliant researcher at a top company, and Jack, who was studying hard to take the bar exam, were both kind, gentle, and incredibly smart. They were my pride and joy. When the divorce was finalized, I got custody of them. They assured me they would handle everything. "Don't worry, leave it to us. Just wait at home and relax," they told me with mischievous smiles as they left for Mike's wedding. Their confidence was comforting, yet it left me with a mix of apprehension and curiosity about what they planned to do. Life hadn't been easy. Mike, a sales director with years of international experience, was always a busy man, and I had supported him throughout our marriage. Quitting my job to take care of our home and children had been his wish, a decision I made willingly at the time but now questioned amidst the loneliness of an empty house. Every day, I battled with the pain and worry Mike's departure had brought. It worsened my menopause symptoms, adding physical anguish to my emotional distress. I had spent years worrying about his health, ensuring he could rest and recharge on his days off. Now, I was left to wonder about the sincerity of all those years. "Why do you want a divorce?" I had asked him repeatedly. But he refused to give me a clear reason, simply citing irreconcilable differences. It wasn't enough for me, it couldn't be. How could it be? His cold, dismissive attitude during our conversations was a far cry from the man I had loved and supported all these years. My trust in him had been deeply shaken. As I sat alone at home, waiting for the kids to return from the wedding, I couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and anticipation. What would they do? How would this day end? The uncertainty of the future loomed large, but one thing was clear: I was no longer the woman who could be swept aside without understanding, without closure. I needed answers, and hopefully, today would bring some. I couldn't believe what Emma just told me. I paused, the knife in my hand hovering over the chopping board. Linda and Mike together? It felt like the ground beneath me was giving way. My sister Linda, the very person I had always had a difficult relationship with, had been seen with Mike. The revelation sent a chill through me. Linda had moved into an apartment close to our neighborhood about a year ago. She'd come over to greet us once, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air during her visit. The conversation was forced and brief, and she left hastily, which I found strange but somewhat relieving, given our strained history. Growing up, Linda and I were never close. Our personalities clashed dramatically. She was often mean-spirited and manipulative, a master of subtle cruelty that adults never seemed to notice. I, on the other hand, was quieter, more sensitive. She knew how to push my buttons in a way that left me crying and looking like the troublemaker to our parents. Her tactics were clever, often cloaked in feigned kindness that fooled everyone but me. Her moving so close had unnerved me initially. Linda had been married and divorced several times, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her settling near me wasn't just a coincidence, but a calculated move. Now, with Emma's unsettling news, the pieces started to form a darker picture. Could there have been something going on between her and Mike even before our separation? I remembered back to our childhood, how Linda would manipulate situations to her advantage. One Christmas, shortly after I had started elementary school, stood out vividly in my memory. We had received dolls as gifts from our relatives, and I had been given a doll dressed in pink, the favorite among us kids. Linda, who received a less popular doll, decided she wanted mine. With all the adults distracted, she snatched it from me. Despite my protests, she tore the delicate pink dress, destroying the doll that I had been so thrilled to receive. Even then, her actions were ruthless, her intentions clear. As I stood in the kitchen, trying to make sense of Emma's words, the past and present blurred into a single, painful realization. Linda's presence in our neighborhood, the sudden breakup of my marriage, and now the possible connection between her and Mike, it all seemed too orchestrated to be mere coincidence. The uncertainty and betrayal made my heart race. I needed to confront this situation, to understand what was really going on. The thought of facing Linda, and possibly Mike, was daunting, but I knew I couldn't let this go. For my peace and for the sake of my children, I had to find out the truth behind Linda's actions and Mike's sudden desire for a divorce. The answers were crucial, not just for my healing, but also to protect my family from further harm. Frozen in shock at my sister Linda's latest deceit, I remember the tears spilling uncontrollably down my cheeks that Christmas. The adults, hearing my cries, rushed over, concern etching their faces. Linda, ever the actress, played her part perfectly, smoothing my hair and speaking in soothing tones. Amy broke her doll's dress, the poor thing. "I'll give her mine," she declared magnanimously. The adults immediately lauded her for her kindness, completely deceived by her performance. Meanwhile, I stood there, scolded for being careless, the sting of injustice sharp and bitter. There, in the crowded room, I was coerced into accepting the black-haired doll from Linda, my silent protest swallowed by the necessity to appear gracious. Forced to thank her, I felt humiliated as she smirked triumphantly at me. Not long after, a brand new doll, identical to the one I had lost, was delivered to our home. It was handed to Linda, who flaunted it cruelly, ensuring I knew that what should have been mine was now hers. These kinds of incidents were common. Living with Linda was a relentless ordeal, her pleasure and my discomfort evident. As I reflected on these memories, my anxiety about her current intentions grew. Linda had been a wild child, hardly focusing on her studies during her middle and high school years, choosing instead to spend her time with a rowdy crowd. "I'm not cut out for studying. I'd rather do fun things that I can only do now," she would declare, with a defiant glare that seemed to mock my diligence. Our parents were constantly worried about her. As she loitered for hours in front of Walmart with her dubious friends, their anxiety deepened. Her troublesome behavior led to frequent police calls, and she was often picked up wandering the streets late at night. Despite causing so much distress, Linda seemed indifferent to the turmoil she created. "One day I'll marry rich, and everyone will thank me," she would say with confidence, a hint of defiance in her voice. In contrast, I had always strived to be the conscientious, top-performing student, partly to compensate for the trouble Linda caused. My efforts paid off, and I gained the trust of my teachers and was chosen as a class representative. People often expressed surprise upon learning that Linda was my sister, so stark was our contrast. Linda, admittedly, was quite attractive, enough to turn heads on the street. But the charm that might have been visible in her elementary school days faded as she chose a path of rebellion and nightlife in her teenage years. Her beauty, I felt, was marred by her actions and the pain she inflicted on those around her. Now, with the unsettling information about her and Mike, these old wounds throbbed anew. The pattern of her life, the manipulation, and deceit, it all seemed to be converging into something sinister. My concern for what she might be plotting against me and my family deepened, fueled by the history of her callousness. The anxiety was palpable, a heavy, twisting knot in my stomach, as I wondered how to confront this potential new betrayal. During my first year of high school, as I was beginning to explore the world of teenage romance and had just started dating my first boyfriend, Linda's behavior escalated in ways that would leave a lasting scar on my early experiences of love. She had started smoking secretly by then, applying makeup heavily even though it was against school rules. The cheap cosmetics she used had a detrimental effect on her skin, causing it to deteriorate and her hair to lose its luster. Despite these visible changes, Linda remained blissfully unaware, still believing herself to be as captivating and charming as ever. Her situation only worsened when she began drinking alcohol. To everyone around us, her dreams of marrying rich seemed increasingly far-fetched and delusional. It was in this turbulent time that an incident occurred which exemplified just how far Linda's intrusive and manipulative nature could go. One afternoon, my boyfriend and I were enjoying a simple date at a fast food restaurant when Linda unexpectedly appeared. She approached us with a cunning smile, transforming her demeanor to that of a doting sister. "Amy, is this your friend? Introduce him to your big sister," she said smoothly. My boyfriend, caught off guard by her sudden presence, introduced himself politely. Linda maintained her charming facade, suggesting that we were close siblings, which couldn't have been further from the truth. As we prepared to leave for a movie, Linda feigned surprise and exclaimed, "Wow, what a coincidence. I wanted to see that movie too." Her intent to intrude on our date was clear, and while I was about to object, my boyfriend, in an attempt to be considerate, suggested we all watch it together. I was dismayed but didn't want to seem rude in front of him, so I reluctantly agreed. That movie date quickly turned into an ordeal. I was unable to enjoy the film, distracted by Linda's presence. To my horror, in the dim light of the theater, she had managed to position my boyfriend between us and, unbeknownst to me, even held his hand. 2 weeks later, my boyfriend ended our relationship, confessing he had found someone else he liked more. I instantly knew it was Linda. True to form, Linda briefly entertained a relationship with my ex-boyfriend before quickly losing interest and discarding him, just as she had with so many of her own past relationships. This pattern of behavior was classic Linda, using her superficial charm to disrupt and then abandoning the situation once she grew bored. Reflecting on these incidents, the pattern of Linda's actions over the years became painfully clear. Her life was a series of manipulations and reckless decisions, with little regard for the fallout on those around her, including me. As I dealt with the latest implications of her possible involvement with Mike, these memories of past betrayals added layers of complexity to my already troubled thoughts about her motives and character. The history of her deceit made me dread what she might be capable of now, not just to me, but to my entire family. Linda's sudden visit a month after Mike left was unexpected and unwelcome, her arrival sending a chill through me. I had a gut feeling about her reasons for coming. She wanted to pry into my personal turmoil, perhaps find some twisted satisfaction in my distress. "How are you doing, Amy?" she asked, her voice feigning concern as she placed her hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt more invasive than comforting. "What do you want, Linda?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She seemed slightly taken aback by my bluntness, but quickly masked her reaction with a feigned hurt expression. "You're being so cold," she said, trying to play the victim. Then, shifting the topic, she inquired about my children. "How are Emma and Jack?" Her sudden interest in them was puzzling and unsettling, given her usual indifference. "They're not here, Linda. Emma is at work, and Jack is at college," I responded, not hiding my annoyance. It seemed obvious to me, but perhaps not to someone like Linda, who had no children and seemed perpetually disconnected from the realities of family life. "Ah, right," she replied, her interest fading as quickly as it had appeared. She then casually made herself comfortable on the sofa, uninvited and unwelcome. Without preamble, she began to share more of her life drama. "Amy, you just got divorced, and well, it looks like I'm headed that way too." I sighed internally, thinking, not this again. But outwardly, I remained composed, detached. Linda's personal life, filled with brief marriages and even quicker divorces, was a chaotic mess I had long decided to stay clear of. I had never met any of her previous husbands, and I had no desire to get involved with her latest troubles. Still, her pattern of marrying real catches only to end up in the divorce court was a cycle she seemed unable to break. As Linda rambled on, part of me wondered about the real reason behind her visit. Was it merely to share her misfortunes, or was there an ulterior motive? Her track record for manipulation and causing distress was well documented in the annals of our family history. I couldn't help but feel on edge, suspecting that there might be more to her story or perhaps some scheme brewing beneath her casual demeanor. Despite my reservations, I listened, a part of me pitying her for the loneliness that must surely lie at the heart of such a tumultuous life. Yet, I remained guarded, wary of whatever Linda might be planning or how it could potentially impact my family and me. As she continued talking, I found myself mentally preparing to deflect any of her typical manipulations or probing questions about my own recent divorce. The conversation felt like a minefield, one I had to navigate carefully to avoid any further emotional upheaval. Linda continued her tale, the details weaving into the fabric of her chaotic matrimonial history. He was a pilot for an airline, she began, recalling her first husband with a hint of nostalgia in her voice. You wouldn't believe how they met, but they seemed really in love at the time. I remembered how she used to brag about her glamorous married life, often taunting me with remarks like, "Since you'll probably never get married, why don't you just enjoy looking at me in my wedding dress?" Yet, as was typical with Linda, the fairy tale didn't last. Her in-laws were a constant source of friction. They lived together, and with her husband often away due to his job, Linda grew bored and restless. She started going out frequently, seeking entertainment and excitement, which infuriated her in-laws. Eventually, even her husband reached his limit and kicked her out. Her second marriage, to a younger man she met while working at a bar, started with promise. He owned his own business and seemed mild-mannered, a stark contrast to Linda's more dominant personality. At first, they were really in love, Linda recounted, her voice tinged with a rare note of regret. But then money started disappearing from his store safe, a safe to which only the two of them had keys. Her husband tried to give her the benefit of the doubt at first, hoping it was just a misunderstanding that would resolve itself. But as the amount missing surpassed $20,000, he could no longer ignore the issue. When he finally confronted her, Linda deflected with blatant disregard, suggesting it might be a miscalculation. However, her husband had installed surveillance cameras, which captured her sneaking to the safe and clearly showed her taking the money. He confronted her with the evidence, agreeing not to involve the police on the condition that she return the stolen money and agree to a divorce. Thus, her second marriage ended disastrously. My parents, ever the rescuers, ended up repaying the money Linda stole, along with providing alimony to smooth over the divorce. Now, Linda was with her third husband, a carpenter with a rough temperament. When things are good, they're really good, she said, but when they're bad. Her voice trailed off, and I could imagine the volatile scenes she described. Their fights were intense, often resulting in noise complaints from neighbors in their apartment complex. And now, contemplating my third divorce, Linda mused, almost as if it were an inevitable milestone rather than a consequence of her actions. I listened, half in disbelief, half in resignation. Despite the chaos she described, there was a part of me that still hoped she would find some stability, if not for her sake then for the sake of our aging parents who were continuously caught in the fallout of her turbulent life. As she sat there, talking about possibly ending her third marriage, I reflected on the pattern of her life, the repeated cycles of excitement and disaster. It was hard not to feel a mix of pity and frustration. Linda, with all her flaws, was still my sister, and despite everything, I hoped that one day she might find the peace and happiness that seemed so elusive to her. But for now, I braced myself for whatever came next, knowing well the unpredictability that came with being Linda's sister. As the weight of Linda's words sank in, I was dumbstruck. The chaos she so naturally brought everywhere followed her into my home once again, leaving a trail of shock and disruption. "Amy, you got divorced too, so we're really sisters after all. We actually get along well," she had declared with a bizarre cheerfulness that only made the situation feel more surreal. Her laughter echoed in my ears, a sound that seemed to come from someone deeply disconnected from the emotional gravity of her actions. Her eyes, gleaming with a mix of triumph and challenge, only added to the discomfort. "Listen, the reason I'm getting divorced is that I found someone new who loves me. We've promised to be together," she revealed, her tone almost casual, as if announcing a mundane daily schedule rather than a fourth upcoming marriage. The news left me speechless. How could she be so flippant, so reckless? And with whom could she possibly be planning to marry this time? I managed a response, playing along while hiding my growing unease. Is that so? You've always been popular, I said, a statement she took as a compliment, laughing loudly. That's right, men can't stay away from me. Her face, heavily made up, twisted into an expression of satisfaction that made me shudder inwardly. Finally, declaring that there was nothing more to do here since the kids weren't home, she left, leaving behind a palpable sense of relief, but also a lingering dread. I felt drained, as if her presence siphoned away my energy, leaving me to grapple with the reality of our relation, so alien yet bound by blood. That evening, as I was still processing the day's revelations, Emma walked into the living room, her usually composed face pale, her voice shaky. Mom, there's a wedding invitation, she said, handing me a piece of cardstock that trembled in her hands. Her distress was palpable, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. It's from Dad, she added, her words dropping like stones into the silence of the room. Taking the invitation from her, I opened it with trembling hands, my heart sinking as I read the names, Mike and Linda. The reality of the situation crashed over me like a wave. My ex-husband Mike, the man I had spent years with, was marrying my sister Linda. The betrayal was profound, almost theatrical in its cruelty. How could they do this, to me, to us? My emotions swirled, anger, betrayal, disbelief, as I crumpled the invitation in my hand. My devotion to Mike, my avoidance of any conflict with Linda, none of it had mattered. They had chosen this path, deliberately, to wound and to shock. Then, as if on cue, the phone rang. The caller ID flashed Linda's name, and with a deep breath, I answered, already knowing what she would say. Amy, have you figured it out yet? I'm marrying your ex-husband Mike. I stole him away. Her voice was smug, triumphant. Linda had always coveted what was mine, and now she had reached out for the most painful grab yet, my husband. The call, the invitation, the news, it was all too much. I stood there, phone in hand, the crushed invitation on the floor, my mind racing with hurt and a burning question. How could I possibly navigate through this betrayal? The road ahead seemed daunting, filled with emotional debris from the wreckage of my family's bonds. As I hung up the phone, the silence of the room enveloped me, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside. Hearing Linda's voice over the phone detailing how she deliberately got close to Mike by inviting him out for lunch from the company cafeteria, a place he frequently visited, was almost too much to bear. Her pride in manipulating the situation, in winning him over so effortlessly, made my hands tremble. Everything seemed to blur before my eyes as she gleefully recounted her strategy. It became painfully clear why Mike had never fully explained why he wanted a divorce. The echoes of my past, of that long-ago boyfriend from middle school days, resurfaced, stark reminders of the pain I had experienced then, now magnified in the betrayal by my husband and my sister. Linda's laughter rang in my ears, a sound filled with malice and satisfaction. I've always been annoyed that you married an elite like Mike. My first marriage was a success, you know, but my mother-in-law drove me out. Why always me? So, I wanted you to feel the same way I did, she said. The cruelty in her voice was palpable, pushing me to the brink of yelling back at her, but I managed to hold back. Her justifications, her snide remarks, it all showcased her true nature, one driven by jealousy and revenge. You were always disliked by your in-laws because you were always out playing around, I finally responded, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside. Her amusement faded into a snort, an ugly sound that filled the brief silence. Shut up. Anyway, make sure you come to our wedding. I'll show you how happy we are. You'll see how much Mike adores me, she said before hanging up, leaving her words hanging like a dark cloud. I collapsed into a chair, my body shaking from the emotional toll. Emma rushed over to comfort me, rubbing my back, as Jack entered through the front door. Mom, are you okay? He asked, his voice filled with concern. My pale face and Emma's worried gestures alarmed him. What's wrong, Mom? Did something happen? Taking a deep breath, I shared the contents of the phone call with them. Emma and Jack, usually so calm and rational, looked stunned as they processed the news. "I can't believe Dad would do something like that," Jack said, his voice heavy with disbelief. It was unbelievable, indeed, and all the more painful, because I had always tried to protect them from the darker aspects of my relationship with Linda. Feeling the weight of years of silence, I began to unfold the entire history of harassment, betrayal, and repeated divorces inflicted by Linda. As I spoke, their expressions grew increasingly troubled. "Can't be true. This is too much," Jack said, his face contorting with disgust. Sharing everything, though painful, lifted a slight weight from my shoulders. I thanked them for their support and made it clear that I wouldn't attend the wedding. But then, Emma's eyes sparkled with a sudden idea. "Wait, we're invited too, right?" Her question hung in the air, suggesting she might have a plan or a reason to consider attending that I hadn't thought of. Curiosity and a flicker of hope mingled with my apprehension as I waited for her to explain. Emma looked like she was barely containing her emotions, managing to keep a composed smile as Linda, adorned in an ostentatious wedding dress, called out to her and Jack in that overly sweet tone. "Call me Mom," she had said, stretching out her arms as if to embrace them both in front of the gathered guests. The video panned to show Jack and Emma exchanging a quick, knowing look before facing Linda again. The room was lavishly decorated, the opulence of the hotel evident in every corner. Despite the grandeur, the atmosphere felt somewhat forced, as if trying to project an image of familial bliss that didn't truly exist. "Mom, we knew what we were doing," Emma explained as they showed me the footage. "We wanted to see for ourselves what Dad was getting into, and we wanted to make sure Linda knew we were not part of her games." Jack chimed in, "Yeah, and we made sure to have a chat with Dad too. We told him straight that trying to take custody was out of the question. We're adults, and our lives are with you." He seemed to get the message. In the video, after Linda's cringe-worthy attempt to play the doting stepmother, Emma and Jack tactfully extracted themselves from her embrace and mingled with other guests, all while keeping a respectful distance from Linda. They managed to capture snippets of conversations, Linda's behavior, and the general atmosphere, which seemed less like a celebration of union and more like a showcase of vanity. "We also talked to some of Dad's colleagues," Emma continued as the video showed them interacting with various guests. "We wanted them to know that we were there to support Dad as his children, not as part of Linda's new family narrative." Jack added, "It was important for us to represent ourselves correctly, to make sure everyone understood where we stand. Plus, we wanted to gather some insights." Their strategy was clear. They attended not to celebrate but to observe, to protect, and to reaffirm their loyalty to me, their real family. They had handled the situation with maturity and tact, ensuring that Linda's manipulations did not redefine our family dynamics. As the video ended, I saw Linda reveling in the attention, oblivious to the true sentiments of her stepchildren. The sight was both sad and oddly satisfying. My children had stood their ground, not swayed by her theatrics or the superficial glamour of the event. "Mom, we wanted you to see this because we knew it would help you feel better," Emma said, giving me a hug. "To see that we can handle Linda and that we're always going to be your kids, no matter what Dad or Linda try to do." Their smiles, full of love and reassurance, warmed my heart. They had gone into a potentially distressing situation and handled it with poise, coming back to me not just unscathed but empowered. They had seen through the facade and returned with the unshakable certainty of where their loyalties lay. "Thank you, both of you," I said, feeling a mix of relief and pride. "You've both grown up so much, and I couldn't be prouder. Let's not let this affect us anymore. We have each other, and that's what truly matters." As they nodded in agreement, I realized that whatever Linda and Mike were plotting or whatever life threw at us next, we would face it together as a family, stronger and more united than ever. As Emma and I watched the video of Jack's unexpected speech at the wedding, my heart was a mix of pride and sorrow. Jack had bravely confronted the awkward truths in front of a room full of guests, many of whom were oblivious to the intricate web of deception that Linda had spun around our family. Jack's voice was calm yet carried a weight that echoed through the hall as he spoke. "Congratulations on your marriage, Dad and Aunt Linda," he began, causing a few smiles among the guests who expected nothing more than a standard congratulatory speech from a son. But as he continued, the mood shifted dramatically. "Between the two of you, 6 marriages. That's not normal." "Oh, I get it, Aunt Linda, you snatched your sister's husband. That's pretty low. You were never normal, were you?" The room filled with whispers and gasps. The shock was palpable, the guests' faces turning from polite interest to disbelief and discomfort. Linda's manipulations, once hidden, were now laid bare in a public and irrefutable manner. Jack didn't stop there. He delved deeper, revealing the calculated nature of Linda's actions. "Today, I'm going to read a bit of my mom's diary. Turns out, my mom is the woman whose husband was stolen by today's bride. Funny thing, the bride is actually her sister. Linda came and told me she was marrying my ex-husband 6 months ago. I was forced into a divorce by my husband who she always got along with. So, that's what it was all about." As Jack recounted these details, Mike's face turned pale. He sat there, the reality of his decisions and the lies he had believed crashing down around him. Jack continued, revealing how Linda had manipulated not only their personal lives, but also infiltrated Mike's professional space under the guise of coincidence. "My sister applied for a part-time job at Mike's company, pretending it was just happenstance, to get close to him. She then frequently seduced Mike and lied to him, saying I was badmouthing him on social media. I don't even use social media, but according to her, there were posts insulting Mike. It turns out she created a fake account in my name. Sadly, Mike believed all this." The room was silent, the weight of Jack's words hanging heavy. As Linda returned to the reception in her new outfit, the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. There was no applause, no smiles of congratulation, only a stunned silence and uncomfortable murmurs. Mike, still trembling, now understood the depth of the deception, realizing too late that he had been a pawn in Linda's game. Emma and I watched as the video captured these moments, feeling a mix of vindication and heartache. Jack and Emma had shown incredible courage and loyalty, standing up for what was right despite the potential for personal pain. It was a bittersweet victory, one that didn't undo the past but offered a clear view of the truth. Sitting back, I felt a complex cascade of emotions. There was sorrow for the pain my children had endured, relief that the truth was finally out, and a renewed sense of connection with Emma and Jack, who had proven themselves to be more than just my children, they were my champions. As we turned off the video, I knew that while the road ahead would be difficult, we would face it together, as a family, fortified by truth and bound by unwavering support for one another. As Linda's former husbands entered the room one by one, each story of success more striking than the last, the atmosphere at the wedding became increasingly tense. Linda, adorned in her golden dress and tiara, which now seemed more like a garish costume than regal attire, watched in growing disbelief and irritation. Her smile faltered as Emma introduced each ex-husband, their stories a stark contrast to the narrative she had no doubt spun about them. The first husband, now an executive, the second a best-selling author with a happy family and a mansion, and the third, once a humble carpenter, now a vice president of a nationwide construction company. Each revelation struck a chord, and Linda's face turned from shock to anger, her expression one of someone who felt the world was conspiring against her. Emma and Jack, presenting this information not with malice, but as a form of poetic justice, smiled gently at Linda's reaction. They had not just come to expose her deceit, they wanted to show that those she had dismissed and discarded had moved on to better, happier lives. Linda, unable to contain her envy and frustration, snapped at the mention of her third husband. "That's just someone who used to get into trouble a lot. He'll never be successful." "I win," she blurted out defensively. But Jack, with a soft but firm tone, corrected her. "Aunt Linda, that's not very nice," he said, his disapproval clear. Emma added, echoing her brother, "We hope you find happiness too, Aunt Linda." The room fell silent as the weight of Emma and Jack's words hung in the air. Linda's face turned pale, her facade crumbling. She had always underestimated those around her, seeing them only as stepping stones or obstacles to her desires. Now confronted with their successes, her own failures and insecurities were laid bare for all to see. Her reaction escalated quickly from shock to outright anger. In a fit of hysteria, she slammed the wedding bouquet onto the floor, her actions uncontrolled and wild. Mike will just end up as a sales manager, right? He was Amy's husband after all. Ah, what a mistake, she cried out, her voice filled with bitterness and regret. The tension reached a peak when she slammed her fist on the table, causing a loud bang that echoed through the room. Mike, until now a silent, grim spectator to the unfolding drama, finally lost his patience. His face turned red with anger as he stood up, shouting back at Linda, "Don't mess around." The confrontation was a shocking spectacle for everyone present, revealing not just the personal failings and resentments between Linda and Mike, but also the underlying insecurities and flaws that had led them to this point. The guests, previously uncomfortable, now looked on with a mix of pity and dismay, witnessing the unraveling of a relationship that was supposed to be celebrated. As the event spiraled out of control, I sat at home, watching the recording, feeling a mix of vindication and sadness. It was clear that no amount of success or revenge could heal the wounds inflicted by years of deceit and manipulation. The only path forward, I realized, was one of forgiveness and moving on, not for Linda's sake, but for my own peace and the well-being of my children, who had shown incredible strength and maturity through it all. That it was important to at least acknowledge the pain caused and to try to mend what was broken. They nodded to each other, a silent agreement that while the past couldn't be changed, the future still held room for reconciliation and healing. Amidst the ruins of the wedding, I watched through the video as Mike's expression shifted from fury to despair. His career, his marriage, his public persona, all had been compromised. The man who had stood at the altar ready to embark on a new chapter was now grappling with the consequences of his choices and the deception that had led him there. Linda, her face streaked with tears, looked utterly defeated. Her schemes, once so cunningly crafted, had unraveled spectacularly, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. As Mike declared his intent for divorce and alimony, her pleading intensified, but there was no sympathy left in the room for her. The guests had dispersed, leaving behind only the stark reality of her actions and their fallout. Emma and Jack, having exposed the truth, felt a mix of triumph and sadness. They hadn't wanted destruction, but felt compelled to reveal the deception, to protect their family and their mother's honor. As they high-fived, it was not out of joy but out of relief that their task was done, and perhaps now, healing could begin. Mike approached them, his face a complex mask of regret and sorrow. "I was wrong. I did terrible things to Amy. She probably won't forgive me, but I need to apologize somehow," he confessed, tears beginning to form. It was a moment of vulnerability they had never seen from him. Emma and Jack were taken aback, witnessing the breakdown of a man who had been a pillar of strength and authority in their lives, now recognizing his missteps. As their father broke down, Emma and Jack exchanged glances, their feelings mixed. They had grown up admiring their father, and seeing him manipulated and brought low by Linda stirred complex emotions. While they could not erase the past, they understood that their father's acknowledgement of his mistakes was a step towards something more positive. Jack spoke up, his voice steady, "Dad, we can try to understand, and we can try to move forward, but it has to be with honesty from now on." Emma nodded in agreement, adding, "And you need to make things right with Mom first. She deserves that much." As the dust settled on what was supposed to be a festive celebration, the scene at the wedding was a poignant reminder of the complexities of family dynamics and the deep wounds that deception can cause. Yet, it also underscored a potential path towards redemption and forgiveness. For my children, their actions had set the stage for a possible reconciliation, or at the very least, a closure that could lead to peace. For me, hearing Mike's remorse opened a door I thought had been closed forever. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary, and perhaps, in time, healing could begin for us all. As I stood in the doorway, the brisk evening air mixing with the lingering warmth of the house, I felt a confusing whirl of emotions. My children, Emma and Jack, had just brought home the chaos and closure of what should have been a celebratory event. Their laughter and bright expressions were a stark contrast to the gravity of the revelations they carried. Emma, ever the bearer of surprising news, spoke up gently. "Actually, Dad is outside. He wants to apologize to you, Mom." My heart skipped a beat. Mike, here, at this house, after everything that had happened? It was almost too much to take in. Jack added supportively, "Dad doesn't expect forgiveness, Mom, but he really wants to apologize. Why not hear him out?" His maturity and empathy were grounding, reminding me that no matter what had happened, our family had grown stronger through these trials. With a deep breath, bolstered by the presence of my incredible children, I stepped outside to face Mike. He looked worn and defeated, a far cry from the composed and ambitious man I had married. The disarray of his appearance spoke volumes about the turmoil he had just endured. "Amy, I was a fool. I'm truly sorry," he started, his voice hoarse. The sincerity in his tone was palpable, and for a moment, I saw the man I had once loved, vulnerable and regretful. "Linda will pay me alimony, and I'll give it all to you," he continued, offering what he thought might be a form of restitution. I nodded, acknowledging his apology and the gesture, though it did little to mend the deeper wounds. "You two were misled by my sister," I said softly, a statement more for myself, affirming that the deception had layers even I was still uncovering. "Can we start over again?" he asked tentatively, reaching for my arm. The question hung in the air, heavy and implausible. The kids, who had followed me out, looked on, their faces a mix of hope and disbelief. But I knew what needed to be done. "That's impossible, goodbye," I said firmly, and gently closed the front door. Mike lingered, a silhouette of lost chances, before turning away and disappearing into the night. Meanwhile, Linda, the instigator of so much pain, found herself isolated and struggling. Fired from her part-time job, she floundered at a convenience store and even tried her hand at a nightclub, where she was blatantly rejected by patrons, preferring the company of younger women. Her life had become a series of humiliations and challenges, her actions having led her to a lonely and difficult existence. Back inside, the calm of my home enveloped me. Jack, already showing great promise in his law studies, and Emma, ever my rock, reassured me of their love and support. We were moving forward, our bond strengthened by adversity, looking towards a future filled with hope. My children's promises to always cherish me filled my heart to the brim. In this newfound peace, I realized that while the past could not be undone, the love and strength of my family offered a foundation for happiness and healing that no external chaos could ever undermine. With my children by my side, I couldn't be